I wanted to talk a bit about how unconstrained growth is a cancer and we can choose a better future. A recent set of problems discovered by the population of my local metro Atlanta community revolve around unrestricted, or perhaps less restricted than should have been, growth. We're talking here about the city that I live in rather than Atlanta proper. The two primary problems we found, along with my neighbors and fellow citizens, they know traffic as well as we do, and of course school crowding, which is less of a concern for us, but it's a concern. The town was, and still is for now, considered a good place to live, and received recognition for that nationally recently. So of course people wanted to move here, and they did, and developers therefore wanted to build more housing, and they made the real estate purchases needed and got zoning approvals and changes that were needed and built more housing. So these additional people caused more traffic on the roads. Their kids added to crowding in the schools. "We're growing!" comes the cry from the politicians and community notables who see such things as good. Growth is good, right? Well, let's keep going down that path. So the town is still perhaps attractive as a place to live. You got nice, shiny new houses, apartments, condos, and townhomes to live in. There are new businesses coming in the areas built up for that, and they're doing well. And they're filling out some places that needed some businesses there, that needed to be redeveloped. And, that makes sense. But of course, then the developers wanted to take some more land, which, to be fair, might not have been the most lovely plot of land in town, and put in high-density apartments and mixed-use developments, condos with elements and retail shops below. The particular development I'm thinking of at the moment is quite nice. It's good looking, and it has nice, decent shops in it. It doesn't have the meme contents of a nail salon, a cell phone shop, and a dry cleaners that all the strip malls always seem to have. The developers, of course, wanted to build a few more of these. And yes, they did, and they're very nice for what they are. The challenge, of course, is that there are high-density ones, and they had dozens of residents, plus the traffic for the businesses, rather than you'd have with no residents, or just the few that would be there if you'd built single-family homes, or as we'll see, perhaps built nothing. On to the single-family homes. In my neighborhood, there was a lovely house from the 1950s that happened to be on one of the largest lots in the entire neighborhood. That eventually came up for sale, and the house was torn down, and then zoning variance was put in for by the builder, and now there are not 2, not 3, but 5 houses going up on that lot. 5! And they're very large houses, very expensive houses. Some of the most expensive houses that the neighborhood has, or that the town could really support. When you think about it, there are a finite number of home buyers who can even afford such housing. It's a small number of people out of the total, and when you reach that level of purchasing power, you can afford to be picky. As a developer, you really shouldn't build too many of those. Even when the economy is doing well, there are only so many people who can afford a house that expensive. So there are now, on that street up the way, for that one lot, 5 times as many, likely soon-to-be residents that are in that same area, in a lot that held a single family for over 50 years. Now imagine that over and over again, taken to the logical conclusion. That, of course, can't continue indefinitely. The neighborhood is a nice place to live precisely because of the low density that was part of the design that was going all the way back to the 1950s. The neighborhood was planned around a certain size lot with single-family homes, and it was extended from a street that came off from downtown that had houses from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and then the ones here from the 1950s. This growth above all mindset has already transformed several of the streets entirely, putting larger and larger houses on those little plots that arguably were originally the affordable housing we always hear so much of a request for, a demand for by some of the politicians. They were small single-family homes, very small. They were the ones in that area near downtown that were starter homes. And they were from, again, the 20s, 30s, and 40s. They didn't need to be torn down and rebuilt on those small lots. But you say, Clemmer, so what? If people want to do that with their property, and they get the zoning and permissions, who are you to stop them and say what they should or shouldn't do? I thought you were a libertarian. Well, that's a bit strong, and perhaps a bit of a straw man. Note that I don't want to stop them if it's the owner of a single family home, some particular person who wants a bigger new house built atop the spot where a tiny 1920s bungalow stood. That's a separate, but of course closely related topic. What I think has to stop, and not just slow down but stop, is the growth. From a libertarian perspective, we're not isolated floating entities that don't impact those around us. Local laws on zoning exist. They serve a purpose in preserving the value of my property. Someone can't build a garbage dump right behind my house. They can't put in a sewage treatment plant. They can't put in a chemical processing warehouse. It can be hard for an ANCAP or the like to grasp that. But part of the reason we bought where we did and people choose to live where they do is because of the proximity to some things and the distance from some other things. If I had less money or cared less, I could go by near some of those other things that some people may not care about living nearby. I do. If they put up slum apartments that damages the value of my property, maybe I have recourse. Maybe we should try to stop them before they do it. But rather than fight about that all the time with people with torts, we have rules and local zoning ordinances and should have politicians here that are trying to help us with that. The idea that growth is an unalloyed good that must always be pursued and accepted isn't valid nor viable economically. Modern macroeconomics and monetary theory seeks this growth. The stock market seeks this growth, as you know. Beating inflation to preserve the value of your dollars requires growth. But the town, as an entity? No, the town does not have to grow, not in size, scale, or population. The town can transform, it can mature and improve. That's a very different thing, and a laudable thing. Surely you see that logically, if we just allow for growth beyond a certain point, we fundamentally transform the nature of the town, and it's no longer what it was. Of course that's true. That new thing, arguably, is not what made the town desirable. If you want streets lined with high-rise apartments, condos, mixed-use developments of townhomes and shops, and an intertwined infrastructure of clogged roads, a shortage of parking decks crammed in where they are that require payment just to do shopping, that's what you'll get if you allow for that uncontrolled growth. You'll be in Midtown or downtown in just a few years. The whole point of living out here is that it was not Midtown. You could park on the street. You can park in a parking lot that's free. It always seems to have a few spaces free in it. There are just enough shops and restaurants of various sorts that they aren't too crowded, but they do well and stay in business. You don't avoid going out and running errands during rush hour, but now that's starting to change. You don't want to go out during rush hour. And look, widening the roads is not a solution. There are too many areas around the town that if we build a better road, the pass-through traffic will just take that road rather than the one they use now. And we won't be any better off. Besides, once the road reaches a certain size and a certain level of traffic, it's not nice to drive on anymore. It doesn't feel comfortable. You know it, you've felt it, and you've seen it 100 times. The road gets to be a certain size, and then that section of town transforms because it's not comfortable to be on that road for certain things. You get auto dealerships, commercial venues that move in and replace what was there before. Adding transit is unfortunately not a short-term solution, and likely not a long-term one here. The bus just doesn't get that much traffic in this town. People are very tied to their cars. And they need to be, as it's the only effective way to get to 90% of the destinations out there. The bus is too slow and it takes too long and things are too far apart. So where is all this leading? Okay, Clemmer, what do we do? Well, we have to take a hard look at the numbers and see where that sweet spot was, where it wasn't quite this crowded, but still had the population to support the number of businesses we'd like to keep. Then we have to do the very hard thing. Not slow the growth, but reverse the growth. How, you say? Yeah, that might sound really bad to you. You've been taught to think that those types of contractions and shrinkings are bad and evil and a problem. But think about it. You got here through some process of things growing. And historically, some towns have shrunk and grown again, well, without disaster. Some are poised right now to grow back to their former sizes from people moving into the cities. And they're going to be in a heyday again now because they would be nicer places to live than living in the cities. The how of this is going to take some work. First, you have to have a commitment from the people of the town and the town government for no more growth. Period. None. No new construction permits for housing, where there weren't housing before. No rezoning to allow for higher density. None. But that's just the start. If we're too crowded, and the schools are too full, and the roads aren't nice to drive on, we need to reduce the population. Yikes! So this means making the really hard choices. For example, when an older apartment complex is slated to be sold and something else built there, we have to build something lower density than what's there now. Ideally back to single-family homes to get that multiplier effect out of there. Where there were 20 people, you now want to have 4. And in the next place where there were 20 people, you now want to have 4. Or less. If that's not workable for that spot, zone it for retail or commercial if there's a demand for that. If that doesn't seem workable, bite the bullet, buy it and make it into a park, or a pool, or a recreation area, or something. This town is known for having a lot of parks already, and that's part of what makes it so amazing and such a nice place to live. We could use an additional pool or two, as I understand it. At least a nice natatorium. The next town over has a nice indoor pool, and we don't. So yes, this all costs money, and it all impacts tax revenues. But again, remember that we're trying to find a sweet spot, and public sentiment is clearly that it is too crowded, there's too much traffic. We've overshot the optimum. Trying to grow into the current size isn't workable. The roads can only be so big. And yes, you can build more schools, but they're expensive too. Other idealistic improvements such as biking lanes and walking trails would of course make for a wonderful town layout, but you have to be realistic both about the costs, the timelines, and how much they'd be used. If you're always going to cave in and just build bigger, you aren't honest about solving the core problem, which is that you put more people in a physical area than is the most comfortable for them if they want to live in the sort of environment a town this size is intended to be. It'll never happen, you say. Well, the counterargument is that the only constant is change, and the change isn't always in one direction. The presumption's invalid that positive change is positive growth. I hope I've demonstrated that to some extent here. A little contraction can improve things here quite a lot. Look, man, it can't work. It can. You just have to have the political will to make the hard choices and not turn a rundown apartment complex into an even bigger townhome complex, and so forth. When one of those old rundown places ends its useful life, you have to be willing to make the decision to rezone it down to something that has less people. Either a group of single-family homes on lots bigger than postage stamps, or be bold and make the area into something useful for the residents all around that area. A playground, a park, or a senior facility. For those concerned with the loss of housing for the disadvantaged and lower incomes and the elderly, they have to be factored into how this is done. We don't want to create a community where retail workers and so forth have to commute into town from elsewhere if we can avoid it. That would work against our traffic improvements we're trying to achieve. Let's use a term we've probably seen before. Right-sizing. We're going to have to right-size our town. And some people will surely fight this. Some will naysay it. They'll still complain about the problems of the situation, but they won't offer a solution that will work. And look, once you grow up physically, you reach a certain size, and you stop growing. Physically, you've matured. Now you can continue to grow in other ways. You mature. Your experiences add to the richness and uniqueness of your life. But if a part of your body kept growing without stopping, we have a word for that. It's cancer. Unconstrained growth is cancer. It is not sustainable. It will kill you as a person, and for a town, it will kill it as well. It is not desirable if you want to retain the living conditions that made the town so attractive a place to live for so long. I believe we can make the right choices now, and if enough of us have the strength of character to do so, we can choose a better future for our town. We can make a positive change.